What's up, everybody? It's George Gabriel, and today we're going to talk about what happens in your track when you don't have balanced frequencies and 9 tips to fix that, coming up in 5 seconds. Now, mixes can suffer by not being full spectrum. And what I mean by full spectrum is that your mix has got either way too low lows, like booming, or your highs are not clear, so it feels like this is over your mix, or you have some harsh mids, or a combination of any of those things. Now, when we're looking at balanced frequencies, we're going to first start with how does your room sound? Maybe you have an abundance of a frequency in your room, and that is affecting your mix. Or maybe you don't have enough of a frequency, so you keep on pushing that frequency, and when you take it out of house, it's just really bad or really harsh or really low or whatever it is. I have a video about tuning your room, and I suggest you start with that just to know what your resonant frequencies are in your room and how to fix that. But looking at these tips, I'm going to lay out 9 of them that you can use to ensure that your frequencies are well balanced. So let's look at tip 1. Tip 1 is more of a concept. It's looking at your mix as a puzzle, and every instrument is a piece of that puzzle. So in the bottom of the puzzle, you have your low end, your kicks, your bass, anything that encompass that low end of your track. The middle of your puzzle is going to be guitars and vocals, keyboards, those kind of instruments. And the top of your puzzle is going to be all the high end things like cymbals, the sibilance of your piece, the high end, the air, the twinkle, if you will. But when you piece together every instrument, it is a puzzle piece, and it has its own frequency range that you have to attend to. Now, every instrument has a frequency range of its own. And in those frequency ranges, there are harsh elements and there are sweet spots. And so it's your job to really figure out what that is for each of them. But I do want to caution against one big mistake that people make. And that mistake is to just solo an instrument and get a sound just on that instrument, not in the context of the rest of your piece. Now, while you can do that initially, you really want to revisit it once the whole mix comes in, because you might find frequencies fighting with each other that don't need to be. Really, what you want to concentrate is on each instrument, what's the sweet spot, and moreover, what's the sweet spot in this particular track. Now, tracks come in all genres, shapes, and sizes. Some of them are rock, some of them are hip-hop, some of them are R&B. Rock has got its own footprint, R&B has got its own footprint, orchestral has its own footprint, and everything in between. But at the end of the day, what you really want to do is get a nice even balance over the entire frequency spectrum range, so nothing stands out too much and it feels even. So no frequency range dominates a particular area and overshadows the rest of the track. So once you grasp that puzzle piece of tip 1, then you could go frequency range by frequency range and start addressing the issues. Which brings me to tip 2, and that's the low range. Now, in my other video talking about how to manage your low end, we talk a lot about lower frequencies not finding each other. But what's more important than that is actually looking at the instruments that are not really intended to contribute to the low end and rolling off any low end off of those instruments that might be interfering with the low end that you want. So that tip requires you to go into all the instruments and find out who might be contributing to the bad low end, and let me roll them off. But the third tip in that is, once you do roll off that low end that's unnecessary from those instruments not contributing, is actually look at the ranges of each instrument that is contributing to the low end and see if they fight each other. So your sub in a kick is around 60 hertz, your thump in a kick is around 100 hertz, your bass could be anywhere from 80 to 350 hertz, but you don't want them coupling over each other. So find the ideal sweet spot in each of those instruments and balance them out. Let's take a look at a theme that I did that has a lot of elements going on, but it gives you an idea of how to place things in the mix frequency wise. So this little piece was a theme that had a lot going on. I'm going to play a little bit of it and just show you all the different aspects of it. Now you can hear there's a lot going on in this piece. There's a whole bunch of mid-range things that are popping in and popping out. There's that really cool bass line and a kick going through it. And now when we're looking at our low end and talking about finding the ranges, what you really want to do is solo these instruments and finding out if they're speaking nicely and they're not fighting each other once you have a couple of low end instruments firing at the same time. So first I'm going to solo this kick to see where it's living in the frequency range. But I do see this kick and snare on here, so I want to see if there's a kick in there as well. So let's take a listen to that. Wow, sounds like it's just distorting. I want to hear this by itself. Yeah, so I'm going to take a look at the EQ curve on this and see what's happening. Wow, there's a lot going on in the very low end, and frankly, it's not really adding. So I'm going to dial that back just with a shelf. Oh yeah, way better. Now if I bring that other kick in, let's see how that feels together. Yeah, I'm getting some of the attitude from that upper kick, but I'm getting that warmth from the lower kick. And when they blend together, they just give a nice kick sound. But now let's add the bass in, and you'll see that I have two basses here. One is an amped bass, and one is the second performance of that bass clean. This is something that you do when you want to have the warmth of the clean bass, but you want to have the attitude of an amp. So you can get that warmth out of that bass, but then you get the harshness of having that amp. So let's hear what that sounds like. This is the unamped bass. Now let's add the other one in there. It's a great combo. You get that kind of light distortion from the amp. Now if you just hear the amp by itself, it's really not getting that fine low end that the direct bass has. So when you couple that together, now let's bring the kick in with that and see if everybody's playing nice. Yeah, it's a really nice blend when you're looking at the low end. Now I'm kind of scanning to see if I have any synth basses on top of that. I did find that there is another drum kit here, so let's hear what that's doing. Okay, I just want to solo that by itself. Okay, another kick. There's three kicks going on here. Let's make sure the kicks are not fighting each other. That doesn't bother me. Looks like this one's off for this little area, so they're actually, but over here they're both on. So let's listen to what it sounds like over here. Okay, I kind of like that sound. Not too much low end. Everybody's kind of got their space. The three kicks are actually having their own little nuances together that blend it to one big fat kick sound. And then when you add those basses in there, once you've balanced your basses, you can move on to the next tip, and it could be the most crucial, and that's if your mids are speaking properly, or if they're too harsh, or if they're too grainy on your ears. Mids can kill a mix if it sounds like hiss, especially with heavy guitars. Sometimes with a guitar amp sound is not that great. You get this residual over the whole mix, and you're really hard to get rid of that. But this is not that kind of track. So there's a lot of elements that are making up the mid-range of this. So let's take a look and see what that sounds like. So I think what's cool about this is that nobody is just like bashing out the whole time. Nobody's just over the top like noise. So everyone's got their little space, and they kind of come on here, they pop in over here, popping over there. So you don't have like a guitar going over it, or like some crazy horn part going over it that could be too much for the room. So when looking at this track, I'm saying, you know what, these all have their little spaces and they're all temporary. But really what encompasses tip number 4 is beware of your harsh mids. Things that are going to bring up harsh mids in an orchestral mix might be horns, or actually strings can bring up, especially big washy string pads. They can add on top of each other and have this just harsh sound to them. Vocals, if they're not given the proper warmth, can also have a harsh sound to them. So you have to find out where that vocal range is, where the sweet spot is, and not make sure you don't have too much 800K coming at you. So it's really EQing those harsh elements out and letting them speak. But back to the puzzle, it's really about finding what frequency ranges are going to work for that particular instrument in that particular track. I'm going to listen to the end and see if there's any guitar issues here. So really there's no EQ on these if I'm looking at these guitars, and they kind of sound nice. There's not too much harshness going on them, but let's see what else is going on here. Okay, that's a high-end piece. Again, they all have their little space in that frequency range. Could you roll off some of that high end and that side chained key part? Maybe. Let's see what else is encompassing that area. Really, the only thing that I hear could be contributing to some noise here is this. Let me hear it in context and see how I feel. Honestly, it doesn't bother me because with that side chain sweep, if you didn't have that high end, you wouldn't get the same effect of that keyboard sound. But if I were to turn off that side chaining, that becomes a lot of cars in the parking lot. So with that side chain, it really kind of helps tame that instrument. Now, tip 5 is really if this were to have vocals over it. If you have too much things happening in the mid-range, they're going to step on that vocal. So you have to learn how to clear those things out, maybe separate that area so the vocal could sit in the middle and kind of put those other high mid instruments to the side so they don't step on each other. The worst thing you could do is have a whole bunch of stuff in the middle hitting that high mid and making it harsh. So what I like to do is when I have those moments, let's say there's a guitar part that I want front and center, but when that vocal comes in, I'm moving it out of the way and letting that vocal sit in the middle. Because when you throw too many things down the center, it all starts to add up, and that's where you get that harshness. So always make sure that when you have a good vocal, clear away a spot for the vocal. Pan things out of the way. They don't have to be hard pan. It could be 30-30, 40-40. It depends on the instrument. But make sure you always leave that space for the vocal to live in the middle. Which brings me to the upper parts of this puzzle, and that's the high end. Now, tip 6 is really one of the biggest mistakes that I think people make because they're mixing loud and they might not realize how loud their hi-hats or their high-end elements are, especially percussive high-end elements. Hi-hats are probably the biggest offender in this area. So I want to listen to this as far as the hi-hats are concerned. And really this drum track I have down here is just hi-hats and cymbals. Now I know I also have some hi-hats on this other kit. Now when I bring in that kick and snare, let's see what we have going on here. Now I'm going to say just from what I'm hearing right now without the rest of the tracks in, those hi-hats are pretty hot. So let me see if I can take these drum hi-hats down. Really, the best way to actually test this out is to lower your volume all the way down so you can barely hear the track. And if you just hear, that means your hi-hats are way too loud. You need to turn them down. But let's listen to this in context. Now the problem is I got two hi-hats doing this move here. Let's listen to this. So let's just listen to this one. Okay, these are centers, so if I'm going to open up this plugin, let's see what happens here. The open hi-hat's a little hot for me, so I'm going to go ahead and take the volume down of just that little guy. Okay, now let's couple that with the other hi-hat. Because remember, that other one's got my cymbal, so I don't want to turn that down too low. Okay, now let's listen to that in context. Yeah, I really like that. That's a lot better. So be aware of those elements on your high end. But one of the biggest things I find in the high end, which is tip 7, is give your mix some air. Now what that means is the very high end. It's the difference between a veiled sound and an open sound. A lot of mixes suffer from this veiled covered sound when it could be wide open with just adding a little air. Now air is typically 10K and higher, but it doesn't have to be that way. Now I do this on my mastering chain. I use this little EQ here, and let's see what this sounds like. Let's turn it off. I'm going to go ahead and just loop this area. Now again, the high end, the air is going to be higher. So what happens if I move this up a little bit higher? 12K. I'm going to turn it off first. And then in. Off. It's really just a very high end, but that air gives you a nice, well-balanced top. So what you're really doing is across the frequency range, you're getting the depth of the subs on the low end, and then you're getting the warmth of the bass with the thump of the kick or even the sub of the kick into the bass guitar part or the whatever your bass is. And then when you go through the middle section, you're making sure that nobody's harsh, that it doesn't sound hard to listen to in your ears. Everybody has their little moment. And then as you get to the high end, you add that air and you make sure the sibilants of those cymbals and stuff like that are speaking nicely, but not too loud. Now tip 8 is really just doing a visual on this. And one way to kind of confirm this is actually pull up just a standard EQ over your whole track. And it'll give you a good indication of what you're listening to and what the frequency ranges are and if they're balanced. There's our warmth. This is the area that's kind of more full, and you want to see this balance in here where it's relatively straight. It's kind of neat to watch this because you can really see where the frequencies are, like that. But this is what I'm looking for. This is pretty much flat through here. So the nature of a track like this is you're going to have a lower end because you want that pumping, and the air is going to tail off because you don't want that to be too loud. So that is actually a good EQ curve to make sure that it's balanced. Now, if you saw some like lots of mids going on, that's when you have to start dialing it back a little bit and going like, this is too harsh. And what I would do is don't just do it over your whole mix. Find out who the culprit is in that mix that's causing that harshness and dial that instrument back. But really in that, the last tip of this is the fine tuning, which I've kind of already addressed in the mastering chain. But what I like to do in my mastering chain is actually just do a little bump on the bottom and a little bump on top. Now we already talked about adding this air, but I also like to add a little warmth on the bottom, and it gives that kind of smile EQ. And the idea of a smile EQ is that you're taking the harshness of the middle out, but you're making it pump on the bottom and you're giving it air on top. But really the biggest takeaways from this are treating every instrument like a puzzle piece. I did a piece of music recently that had this intense acoustic guitar part in it. It was kind of an arpeggiated guitar part, but it needed to speak. But if I actually EQ'd that guitar so the guitar sounded good in the crux of the whole mix that had a whole bunch of other things going on, it would eat up some of the other parts of that track and it would fight them. In fact, when you solo the acoustic instrument, you're like, wow, this does not sound good. It sounds kind of harsh and kind of mid-rangey, but in the crux of the mix, it sounded perfect. So that's what I'm talking about, the puzzle piece. Maybe this puzzle piece, you only need these frequencies in it to work in the entire puzzle. Maybe this other low-end puzzle piece, you really only need this area and you need to duck out this area. So if you have like 30 tracks, everybody should have their little spot in the frequency range that nobody is doubling up or tripling up or quadrupling up in one particular area, that everybody's got their little area. So if you go with that puzzle piece mindset, I think you're going to have a much better time at the end to get exactly the nice balanced frequency ranges you need to make your track sound great. What do you think? What are your techniques to balance your frequencies? Give me your comments and let's dialogue about it. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, click subscribe, click the bell icon to be notified of future videos, and follow me on Instagram at GGabrielMusic. I'll see you next time on George Gabriel Music.